Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. So today it's not surprising that we've also got the news since the TCG got their December ban list that the OCG have instead also got their ban list. I think this comes out as of the 1st of January, that's the implementation period, and we'll cover why these cards within the OCG have been put in their various positions. So the only card that is limited, it's actually forbidden, is Grinder Golem. It's a dark attribute fiend type level 8 with 3000 attack and 300 defense. Its effect is it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must first be special summoned from your hand to your opponent's side of the field by special summoning 2 grinder tokens. These are fiend type dark level 1 with 0 attack and 0 defense in face up attack position on your side of the field. If you special summon this monster, you cannot normal summon or set a monster during the same turn. This card is an absolute nightmare to deal with. For starters, it lets you special summon this card in whatever position you want to your opponent's field. You're not going to be putting it in attack mode. It's not going to be having those 3000 attack points used against you. You're going to set it in defense with those measly 300 that you can easily run over. The biggest issue was this card came out. It came out in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, I think this was like Season 3, and it was held by yugioh. She used it. It had no relevance at that point until Link Monsters came out. Once people started using tokens, that's it. It became free for all. This card was incredibly expensive, even for it being old. It just shot up in price, and this had a nuisance interaction with things like Akashic Magician and Firewall Dragon, where you would essentially summon the 2 tokens, bounce this card, Grinder Golem, back to the hand using either of those 2 monsters, special summon it again, and then you just keep generating tokens, keep generating them to summon more and more Link monsters until your opponent just basically gave up because they had no way of counteracting this card. I think it's a very useful card, but it's a shame that it has had to have this restriction to it, but if it had just been errated, or maybe to limit the way maybe this card shouldn't be allowed to be returned to the hand or something like that, then I could see it coming back to the game. But as it is, I think as well, because they're unbanning Firewall Dragon, that this instantly has to go onto the forbidden list. It's just a victim of circumstance, unfortunately. Red Reboot is a counter trap card with the effect when your opponent activates a trap card, negate the activation, and if you do, set that card face down. Then they can set one trap directly from their deck. For the rest of this turn after this card resolves, your opponent cannot activate trap cards. You can activate this card from your hand by paying half your life points. I can understand why this card is incredibly powerful and why it's been limited to 1. It is an absolute nightmare to deal with. Okay, it does reset your opponent's trap card, so that means it's similar to something like a wire tap, as that just essentially that shuffles that back into the deck. But this is more destructive because yes, you're able to then search for a trap card, but you're shut from using any trap cards for the rest of the turn. It also has the flexibility of letting whoever uses this card paying half their life points to use this instantly from the hand. By doing that, you're preventing your opponent from doing anything. This is the highest speed of cards, so it can't be countered. And it shuts down your opponent's effects. So if your opponent is going for an OTK with this card, you're not going to be able to do anything about it, and you're not going to be happy to be defeated by one card which has not had real balance to it. The Servant is a normal spell card with the effect send 1 monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, then add 1 Dogmatica monster or 1 Fallen of Albaz from your deck or graveyard to your hand with attack less than or equal to that sent monsters. For the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, you cannot special summon from the extra deck. You can only activate 1 Nadir Servant per turn. So I think this card is just meant as a search target for the Dogmatica archetype. I know they're very against extra deck monsters, and they cancel a lot of them out. That's what's made the deck too consistent, and obviously this is the part that they've decided to just limit. Dino Wrestler Pancratrops is an Earth attribute dinosaur type level 7 with 2600 attack and 0 defense. Its effect is if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only special summon Dino Wrestler Pancratrops once per turn this way, and as a quick effect, you contribute 1 Dino Wrestler monster then target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. You can only use this effect of Dino Wrestler Pancrotrops once per turn. This is an absolute nightmare card, and I see why it's been put to 1 for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it can special summon itself just for your opponent having a couple more cards than you do. There aren't any limitations outside of that. The second is that, it's a 2,600 attack monster. Okay, if it said its attack is halved for the rest of the turn, or whilst it remains on the field, I could see that being a little bit weaker. But the other thing is, as a quick effect, you can just get rid of an opponent's card. Traditionally, most people will just get rid of this card because this is a Dino Wrestler in itself to trigger that effect. So you're doing a 1-for-1, and you could be disrupting one of your opponent's key cards. Or if you're running a pure build Dino Wrestler, then good luck, because your opponent is at the mercy of this card. This is the last limited card. It's Firewall Dragon. It's a light attribute Cyverse type Link 4. It's got link arrows to the left, the top, the right, and the bottom, and it needs 2 or more monsters. The effect is once while face up on the field as a quick effect, you can target monsters on the field and or graveyard up to the number of monsters co-linked to this card, return them to the hand. If a monster this card points to is destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one monster from your hand. So the main reason this card is banned is to do with the returning to hand shenanigans that are constantly happening with Grinder Golem and some other various cards as well that can maybe resummon themselves and then trigger off an effect. This card became far too powerful, so the errata has meant that it can only be used, once whilst it's on the field, and not once a turn or multiple times a turn, which is what people were trying to abuse this card with. Duloran, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier, is a water attribute beast type synchro monster. It's a level 6 with 2,000 attack and 1,400 defense. It requires a tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner water monsters. The effect is, once per turn, you can return any number of face-up cards you control to the owner's hand. For each card returned to the owner's hand by this effect, this card gains 500 attack until the end phase. Much the same way of how, Firewall Dragon had its effect to return cards. This is the other reason why this card is also where it used to be restricted and banned at a point, because by being able to return those cards, you could then resummon them and then trigger off those effects. That's something you really don't want to be seeing happening anymore. And so I think itself got maybe an errata to make it so that it's once per turn and not constantly being abused. I think this, because it came out during the 5Ds era, meant that still even in that time there weren't hard once per turn effects installed within some of the more powerful monsters. Wind Up Magician is a fire attribute spellcaster type level 4 with 600 attack and 1,800 defense. Its effect is, if the effect of a wind-up monster is activated, except a wind-up magician, you can special summon one level 4 or lower wind-up monster from your deck in face-up defense position. This effect can only be used once while this card is face-up on the field. So this card is just able to bring out another wind-up monster. The whole point is so that you can go into some of the more powerful wind-up Xyz monsters, and generally I think you had the whole hand looping issues where you would be able to then rip your opponent's hand and they would end up with 0 cards in hand, making it almost impossible for them to top deck into anything useful. Cursed Eldland is a continuous spell card with the effect, you cannot declare attacks except with zombie type monsters. You can only use each of the following effects of Cursed Eldland once per turn. You can pay 800 life points to add 1 Eldlick monster or 1 golden land, spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. If this card is sent from the spell and trap zone to the graveyard, you can send 1 Eldlick monster or 1 golden land, spell or trap card from your deck to the graveyard. So the purpose of this card is it lets you essentially get the necessary cards you need within the Eldlick archetype, and the various support cards is consistent because you just keep paying life points just to have the search. And of course, if this is sent to the graveyard, then you're able to then Foolish Burial one of your cards, which can then probably activate from the graveyard as well. You've got many zombie-type monsters that have effects that trigger in the graveyard, and you also have cards like Book of Life which recover them as well. Fossil Dig is the first of the cards to be limited, so you can play 3 of them. It's a normal spell card with the effect add 1 level 6 or lower dinosaur monster from your deck to your hand. Now, the dinosaur archetypes were really powerful a few years ago, especially when they got all the different, support giant Rex. You had that Tyranno card as well, which is a boss monster which flipped all your opponent's cards face down, and then essentially you could keep attacking into them and do 1,000 points of burn damage for each one you get rid of. This added far too much consistency to the deck, and that's why at that time it was limited and maybe just even straight up banned. Because that's no longer that viable an option and most people kind of don't use that strategy anymore, that's why this has gone back to instantly to 3. Tour Guide from the Underworld is a Dark Fiend level 3 with 1000 attack and 600 defense. The effect is when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon 1 level 3 Fiend monster from your hand or deck but negate its effects. Also, it cannot be used as synchro material. This card was actually used in pair with things like the Burning Abyss archetype, just because you could bring out the Dante a lot easier instantly. It's a 1-turn Dante, and that could then become a 2,500 attack monster when it milled the 3 cards using its own effect. There could be other variations and reasons for why it's been introduced, but generally speaking, lots of people have either forgotten about this card or maybe it's just been outclassed and people are able to counter it a lot easier when it initially came out for Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal in the Xyz era. And the final card is Dark Gretha. This is a Dark Attribute Warrior type at level 4, 1,700 attack and 1,600 defense. Its effect is you can special summon this card from your hand by discarding 1 level 5 or higher dark monster. Once per turn, you can discard 1 dark monster and send 1 dark monster from your deck to the graveyard. So the whole point of this card is it helps to set up your graveyard. Some of the dark monsters require specific numbers of dark attribute monsters in the graveyard. This helps to add to the flexibility without having to add specific cards, which can make things more difficult or a bit more cloggy. It's just general support, and actually this really ramps up the help that most dark attribute decks need. Given how powerful some dark attribute decks already are, it might just be forgotten about for whatever the current existence of cards are. So what do you think of this? I personally like the design of how the ban lists have gone. They are very different, and I think actually that recognises the different challenges that both the TCG and the OCG have. But I would like to see a little bit of a cross ban list at some point, so we get a little bit of a time where similar things are being played. How or when that would happen, who knows, and whether that will actually ever happen, very unlikely.